But welcome. This is the 2026, well, it's 2025, but we're talking about the 2026 UTA. And I'm going to start by just briefly going through a bit of a description of each of the courses. You've probably all noticed that there have been some recent updates from Ironman on some pretty good changes to the courses and one possibly not so good change. And then we will talk about just how much training you're likely, or what sort of state of fitness you need to be in to start one of our training plans. And then I've had quite a few questions emailed in, so I'm going to I'll go through the questions that have been emailed, and then we'll just open it up for questions from the chat. So actually, there was a few thumbs up there before. Just as out of interest, how many people we're going to just run a very quick survey. How many people are doing the UTA 11? Can you do a thumbs up or whatever it is you guys just did before? There's a few. Okay, UTA 22. Do you have many of them? Okay, quite a few UTA 22ers. UTA 50. All right. Okay. So far, it's heavily in favor of UTA 50. UTA 100. Okay, good bunch of them as well. And then any nutters doing the miler? Right, some of them as well. Good work. Okay, cool. Right. That just helps me know what I'm going to focus on. So let's just do a very brief rundown of all the courses. I'll try to keep this brief and then we can get into the questions. So the UTA 11, that's changed. The course has changed a few times. The latest course is actually awesome. It starts and finishes at Scenic World. There's a truckload of stairs, a big descent down Fernbauer. You obviously have to climb back up the Ferbers, which is also awesome because I think the UTA doesn't feel like the UTA if you don't finish up the Ferber stairs. So it's a pretty hard, punchy 11K, but it is awesome. You get to see some great scenery, and with the right sort of stair and mainly stair training, actually, it's doable by most people. I don't worry about writing any notes. I've created a PDF that I'll just email to everybody after the webinar, which has got the course descriptions and also how much training is required, so you don't need to take any notes. The UTA 22, that is the event that personally I think hurts the most, to be honest. It's long enough to feel long, but it's short enough to be able to run it fast if it's something that you're trying to race. And the fact that it starts with 8 kilometers straight down a fire trail and with everyone pretty hyped up, everyone tends to run a little bit too fast down to the creek. And then there's an awfully big climb. Well, there's a climb and then a descent to the next creek and then a huge climb back up to Lura Forest, 5K through the forest and finishing up the stairs. So I think I put up with sorer legs from the UTA 22 than the UTA 50 because of how fast you end up running down Kadumba. The UTA 50 I have also done 3 times. That pretty much showcases the best I think the Blue Mountains has to offer in terms of scenery, the clifftop track, and then you've done 28K on the stairs before you have to go down Kadumba. So you've got to be good with your stair training and have strong legs so that your knees aren't shot and your quads aren't cooked before you run down the hill. And it really zaps your energy. So often people come into the aquatic center 2 kilometers later feeling really tired and really cooked because you've just gone up arguably the hardest climb of the day. And then for a lot of people, you get into the aquatic center, which is around 50, 55K. And it might be getting close to dark, getting close to dinner time. Your support crew's about to go out for pizza for dinner. You're feeling a bit sorry for yourself because there's still 45K to go. And it's actually the point in the course where there are the most voluntary withdrawals. So voluntary withdrawal just means the medics didn't tell you you're not allowed to continue. So you'll have bad blisters, you'll feel tired, you might have been vomiting all morning. But anyway, what I would recommend with the aquatic center is don't pull out at the aquatic center, no matter how bad you're feeling, unless the medics tell you to. Try and have some food to regain some energy, get yourself back out the door and make up your mind about 2 or 3 kilometers later. The support crew can drive their cars along to the top of the the cliff top track. I was going to say the top of the giant stairs, but they've taken that out of the course. And they could potentially pick you up 3 or 4 kilometers later, by which time you'll have either regained your energy and decide that you can make it, or you will have confirmed that you really are cooked and you'd rather go out for dinner with your support crew. So I'd highly recommend not pulling out at the aquatic centre. You need to be brave and keep on going. Now the miler, that is a different beast altogether. I've said that the 50 showcases the best the Blue Mountains has to offer, but the miler is different. So it starts in the Gross Valley on the Blackheath side, and the scenery over there is absolutely spectacular. The weather is so brutal over there that no trees can basically grow. So there's a lot of scrub on lots of the plateaus that you run through, which means that the vistas are a bit bigger because you're not stuck in the trees. The climbs are enormous. The Perry's look down that you go down is a staircase, and it's pretty close to exactly 3 Ferber stairs on top of each other. So that might be hard to imagine, but it's about 2.5 kilometers long, and it's got about 600 to 700 meters of descent. So it pretty much is 3 Ferbers. So imagine running down 3 Ferbers in a row, pretty much near the start of the miler. Then you've got to climb up a scramble that is the same size, so the same up the other 600 or 700 meters on the other side. And then Bruce's Walk, which is a sort of pylon track, which is pretty slow going. And that's so your first 45K is very slow, very hard going. And then you cross the highway and you run along a fairly user-friendly trail back through Medlow Bath, back to Narrowneck, and then you're on the 100 course. So one thing I was amazed about this year was that the pull-out rate of the miler was actually remarkably low. So the people that did it must have known what they were signing up for and must have known how hard the Gross Valley was going to be. So yeah, well done to everybody that got that done. Now the changes, let's just briefly talk about the changes. UTA 11 is going to start a little bit later. I'm not selling the miler. Someone has just told me, actually Shane, who finished the miler, you did well, Shane, finishing it, but Shane's also finished the UTMB, so he probably found it easy. I'm not saying it's a bad race, it's just a hard race and you've got to be well prepared. So UTA 11 is going to start at 12:30 instead of, I think, 11 a.m. That is to allow people to get up from Sydney in the morning so that they can just leave on the morning to get to the race. So that's a good change, I think. The UTA 22 so far, from what I've seen, is not changed. But I think very luckily or very gladly, it is on the old course, which is from the QVH hospital down the fire trail, like I just described before, and up to the finish, as opposed to a loop, which they've done a couple of loops that started and finished in Scenic World, which I don't think were any near as good as the original UTA course. The UTA 50 is essentially the same, but they're taking out the descent down the giant stairs. So what used to happen is you do an out and back on the road, get onto some single track, and then there's a big descent down the giant stairs, which tends to be a traffic jam. If anyone's scared of heights, they tend to freeze up down the giant stairs because there are some pretty scary sort of drop-offs that you're looking at. And it's obviously single file. And then you go through Lura Forest and go up the other side, which is also slow going. So they've taken that out of the course, which I think will free up the traffic significantly. Plus, they've spread the start groups out from 1.5 hours to 3 hours, which you would think should make an enormous difference. So I think the traffic jams in the UTA 50 should be significantly less. So that's a great change. The UTA 100, that's got even better changes. So they've actually, let's start from the beginning with that. They've spread out the times. So instead of 1.5 hours, that's again gone up to 3 hours. So the start groups are going to be further apart. They've moved checkpoint 1 slightly earlier on so that it will again break up the field before you get to the end of Narrowneck. And then they have agreed to put the terrace ladders back in. So there's going to be 2 routes off Narrowneck. So the huge queues that happened last year, especially for sort of probably start wave 4 and 5, they should be significantly better because you're basically going to double the numbers getting off Narrowneck. So probably half the people will go down through the ladders and half the people down Duncan's Pass. The thing that surprised me in some way is the original UTA on this course used to go down the Ferbers and go up the Goldens and then along Narrowneck, which splits up the field even more. but the Golden Stairs are currently open, but they are so subject to bad weather. They've been closed way more than they've been open in the last 5 years. So I think just in order to minimize future changes and probably just sort of solidify and confirm the course, I'm guessing that's why they have not put them into the 100. Then finally, the miler. I think, unfortunately, I've read a few Facebook comments. This seems to be the one that people are most upset about, and I think understandably so. They're moving the start from the morning to the afternoon or evening. I don't think they've yet confirmed the start time. I'm assuming that's because national parks don't like people being in the Grand Canyon because there's loads of tourists in there. The Grose Valley has some other layer of protection that national parks are more particular about than the Jamison Valley, where the rest of the UTA is. So I think that's part of the problem. The downside is if you're starting in the dark, starting in the afternoon, you're probably going to be going down that triple Firbers, also known as Perry's Look Down, when it's either getting dark or it is dark. Going up Lockley's will probably be dark, which is very technical, and it's going to be harder in the dark. And then Bruce's Walk, which is the most technical part of the section, is going to be dark as well. So that's going to make it trickier, which I guess adds to the challenge. You don't sign up to a miler because it's going to be easy. The other thing is that, and lots of people did comment about this, it probably means for the bulk of the field, you're going to be going through 2 nights. So you're basically going to have 1 day and 2 nights. So if you're out there for 40 hours, it could be 28 hours in darkness and not many hours in the daylight. So seems like a shame. I'm not sure if there'll be so much protesting that they will change it, but I guess we'll find out with time. Does anyone want to type a question about any of the course changes or have any specific questions? Hopefully I've sort of covered it there. No questions? Okay. Right. Let's move on then to the next section. Can just to make sure this is still working, because I'm not good at technology, a couple of hands up from anyone who's still listening. Okay, good. Still going. Sorry. Right. Now, the most important thing with training, and I've said this so many times, if you've listened to much of what I've said over the years, it won't come as any surprise, but it's just consistency. So if you want to train for a big, long, hard event, then training consistently is what matters the most. So that's week after week and month after month, which means you should start your training as early as you possibly can, so that you don't have to ramp it up quickly. It's ramping things up quickly and having a big increase in volume is what tends to cause most people most of their problems, most of their injuries. So we just call that little and often philosophy. You're better off running a little bit frequently so that you're less likely to break, especially in this early phase before you're necessarily following a specific plan. So a way I describe it to lots of physio patients is imagine you lived 5 kilometers away from work and you decided you were going to do most of your running just commuting to and from work. So you run 5K on Monday morning, you sit down at work or stand up at your standing desk at work, hopefully. You run home in the evening, so it's 2 5K runs, and you do that Monday to Friday, and then you decide you're going to be a mountain biker for the weekend. So you've done 10 5K runs, so 50K over the course of the week. It doesn't feel like it's really taken too many cookies out of the jar because each of the runs was only 5K and you've had good recovery between it. That is much easier on your body than running 50K every Saturday. Now, I know it's mentally reassuring to do a long run, and as you build up to doing something like the UTA, there are certainly long runs you would expect in the training plan, but your main priority needs to be not getting injured. So if running 50K is more likely to cause you an injury, you need to find some formula that works for you that you can keep on repeating so you don't get injured. So 50K might sound a bit stupid, but 10 5K runs is easier than 5 10K runs, as an example, on the body in terms of how quickly it takes to recover. So sort of between now and whenever you're jumping into an official plan, I would recommend just trying to train consistently and adopting that little and often philosophy, because the cumulative miles that you can run without getting injured are what's going to help you be the best trail runner by the time the UTA comes around. And it's obviously relevant for all of your other events as well. So we start our training block with a base training plan. The base training, our one lasts for 12 weeks. It's all based on heart rate training. So I try and convince people that running with a low heart rate is a good idea, because that also helps significantly with not getting injured. So keeping your heart rate low, keeping that effort easy tends to help build your immune system. It puts less stress on your bones and your joints and your muscles so that you can maintain that consistency. So 12 weeks of base training is what we usually start with before jumping into the race training plan. And if you do the 12 weeks of base training, you've created a lot of just that easy mileage. You've made your body strong so that then it can cope with the harder training sessions closer to race day. As part of race training, you should also be working on your flexibility, your mobility, your foam rolling, your strength and stability, and trying to get all those other aspects of your training dialed in so that they sort of become second nature as you get closer to race day, and they are part of your training routine rather than something you just add on at the end if you've got a chance. So the UTA, the UTA 22 course has very few stairs. A lot of people think that you have to do lots of stair training for the UTA. It's only basically the only stairs in the UTA 22 are the firbers, and you've done 21K by the time you get to the bottom of them, and pretty much everyone is going to be hiking up them anyway. So the focus of attention for the UTA 22 needs to be basically downhill running to get your legs strong for downhill running. The other events, so the 11, the 50, the 100, and the miler, they all have a lot of stairs and they all require a lot of stair strength. So doing lots of stair training and becoming confident and comfortable on stairs are good for those events. UTA 22, not so much. The long ones, so the 22, the 50, the 100, and the miler all go down Kadumba. I'll come back to that actually, because there's been a few questions about how you prepare your quads for running down Kadumba. So we'll come back to that in the Q&As. Now, the next thing I said I'd talk about was how to fit the UTA into your season. So if you've got other events coming up, you basically have to pick and choose what is most important. So if your main goal for the next 8 or 9 months is the UTA, then I would highly recommend picking other events that support that goal as opposed to ones that potentially compromise it. So we call them A races, B races, and C races. So A race is the big goal. So if you're on this webinar, I'm assuming for a lot of people that's going to be the UTA. A B race, just as an example, could be Tarawera. So you might be doing Tarawera in February or March, whenever it is, and use that as a build-up race. But it means that you probably or shouldn't be racing it at 100% and therefore compromising your ability to do the UTA. So you've got to be pretty careful with what races you do in the lead up, because if you race so hard that you can't train for a couple of months, you lose that consistency, and then losing that consistency is what is going to make your A race be a lot harder to do. So hopefully that makes sense. Racing too often is pretty common. It seems there's so many races nowadays. It's crazy. There's almost something on every weekend. In fact, multiple things on every weekend at the moment where we are. So yeah, picking and choosing what races you do and is vital. And then knowing whether to treat them as a B race or a C race is also vital. I actually think, despite me like trying to be cautious about other races, I think there's definitely a place for doing races in your build up to a big race, because it's great practice for your nutrition, great for carrying the right gear, great for using poles, but also the nerves. So when you wake up on race morning, you tend to be a bit more nervous. You find it harder to eat breakfast. You have to learn what gear to pack in your bag and learn whether it's comfortable to carry. So there's lots of good lessons from doing lead up races or B races that will benefit you on race day. So yeah, B races are a good idea, but you've just got to treat them as B races and not break yourself in the process. Now, actually, a good quote that again I've used in quite a few articles in the past is that most people overestimate what they can achieve in 6 months and underestimate what they can achieve in 5 years. So don't try and think you can get away with a whole lot of stuff in the next 6 months and not cause yourself problems. If you take that longer approach where you build up slowly and cumulatively and you train consistently for year after year after year, then you'll be amazed at what you can do. So at the moment, like a 100K might feel like it's way beyond your reach, but you'll be amazed once you've done a few 22s and a few 50s. There's a lot of people that then think, oh, actually, I'll try the 100 and see how it goes. Right. That's pretty much my roundup of just the courses and sort of the vague training approach. Has anyone got any questions before I'm going to answer some of the email ones that have come in? But does anyone have any questions about any of that? Can you still hear me and am I making sense? Okay, lots of thumbs up, but no questions. Can someone write a message just to make sure my message thing, my chat thing is still working? I think it should be. Oh, yep, good. Okay, cool. All right, here's a question. From Jennifer. Thanks, Jennifer. We all get sick from time to time. Do we just continue the training plan even though we might have missed a week or so? Well, good question. And it's very well, the short answer will be no, but it depends on a whole bunch of circumstances, including how long you've been a runner. So let's just say you've got a cold or a flu, you're on one of the big weeks of the training plan, and you can't run for a week or two. Do you jump straight back into week whatever we're up to? So let's say you get sick in week 9, can't run for week 9, you run a tiny bit for week 10. Do you jump straight back into week 11? It depends on if you've been training for the ultras for years and your body is strong and you don't have much of a history of injuries, then you probably can jump back into week 11. But for most people, you probably would be better repeating week 9 and then maybe skipping week 10 and go to 11. It's a pretty tricky question to answer, but you definitely need to take it easy when you're ill. Don't try and train through illness. That's just and then how quickly you jump back in depends on pretty much on how much running you've had. If you feel like you're pushing the envelope, and this is the longest run you've trained for, then you need to go on the side of caution and
Thank you for traveling with Skybus. We look forward to seeing you again when you next travel.
Right.
Now arriving.
Can someone please comments? Can people please mute themselves? Okay, I think we're muted again. I had a mute all button, but it doesn't seem to be working. Right. Now some more questions. Oh well, there's been a whole bunch. Is the 22K, this is from Katie, a reasonable goal if you've done the 11 twice but slow? Yes, definitely. Yep, if you've done the 11 twice and survived it, the 22 is pretty different because of the fire trail, and you'd have to be pretty committed to the training, but definitely 2 11s is enough to step it up to the 22. How does training for the UTA 100 compare to the COSI 100? That's an interesting question. I had a shocker at the COSI 100 last year, which has changed my opinion on COSI to being a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. So the UTA 100 has got lots of stairs in the second half. It's got that massive downhill with 22K to go. So UTA, I would say, focusing more on stairs and vert is probably more important for the UTA than COSI. But I think the two things that got to me at COSI, which I was not expecting, because if you look at it on just the elevation profile, it's only 3,100, I think it is, as opposed to 4.5 in the UTA. So I sort of naively thought it wasn't going to be that hard. The altitude, so it starts at 1,600 meters and stays above 1,600 meters for 60K. So that got to me. So my heart rate was way higher than it should have been. And those beautiful looking granite paths with all the rocky paths were also really hard on the body. So I did almost all my training on fire trail thinking that it was going to be a fast runnable course. And it turned out not to be the case. And I think that's what gave me really bad cramp was from running on those on those the granite paths. So to answer your question, I actually think I would now approach Cozzy like the 100 because I think being used to the single track, being used to the stairs will help train your body for the granite paths at Cozzy. So yeah, pretty much the same. You could get away with a little bit less vert training for Cozzy, but because of the altitude, the stronger you are, the better. So more vert is also good. Hope that answers that for you. That was Ruth. Tash, stairs steppers for training on stairs, or better to get on stairs on trails. Um, Lots of people don't live in a place where there's a truckload of stairs. So if you don't have access to stairs, I've heard some pretty crazy training sessions like running for 4 hours in a football stadium, just going up and down stairs. So that's kudos to those people for putting up with it. I think the stair steppers definitely have a place. They are good for going up, but you don't get to go down. And so downstairs is pretty hard on your knees and hard on your quads. So training downstairs is arguably just as important as upstairs. This is where strength training kicks in. If you live in a flat place or you don't have access to many stairs, I created a session which is actually linked in all the UTA training plans where you do some squats. Excuse me, you do some squats, you do some lunges, then you run a K, and then you keep on repeating that. And that is one of a reasonably good way of replicating stairs when you don't actually have access to stairs. It creates similar, it's not exactly the same, but it's a pretty similar strength. But yeah, if you've got a stepper machine at the gym and you don't have any stairs, then the stepper machine's good. Damo, if you are running the UTA 100 or miler, you be racing the New Zealand 50? Oh, good question. Or go for the 100, but slower than you plan on racing the UTA? Good question. So if you're running UTA, 3 or 4 months before that, should you race Tarawera, the 50, and go hard, or should you do the 100 but go slower? That's a good question. Depends very much on how strong the individual is. If you've done a few hundreds before and you know how well you pull up, then you've probably got a bit more room for error. If UTA 100 was going to be your first 100, I would only do the 50 at the Tarawera. I definitely wouldn't do the 100 at the Tarawera if your main goal is the UTA 100 and that's intending to be your first 100. Actually, it wouldn't be your first if you're doing Tarawera, but you know what I mean. And even then, I wouldn't race the 50. I would do the 50 as a B race, practice all your nutrition and stuff, but don't go absolutely hard out. If you've done lots of 50s and you pull up reasonably well, then you could go pretty hard at the 50 at Tarawera and have a couple of weeks of recovery and then get back into UTA training. There is enough of a gap between those two races. The closer you are to the UTA, the more risk there is of doing a hard event. So a race in April, as an example, like 4 or 5 weeks out from the UTA, you shouldn't try and race a 50K that close. I've done it and it didn't end well. Someone else has asked for some more details on B and C races. This is Laurent. I'm not sure if you mean specific events that you can do or just how to do a B races and C races in general. There's actually an article on Streek, which I will create a link to in the email that I send everyone. There's a pretty good description of how B races and C races affect your body and how to pick and choose which they are. It's pretty descriptive, so I think that'll answer all those questions. Mike, is running hills and mountains a good match for stairs, or is it best to focus specifically on stair training? Because the UTA has a bit of both, you ideally need to do both. A lot of people, even if you've trained a lot on hills, I find a lot of people when they run on lots of stairs end up cramping earlier than they would expect. And it's because you use your leg muscles, you use your muscles differently on stairs than you do on hills. A lot of people will probably resonate with this. If I haven't run on stairs for quite a long time, and I do even like a 10K, which is just on the cliff top track, which is up and down stairs, so nothing huge, but my calves feel really, really tight and really sore for a few days. And that's because you use them in a different way on stairs than you do on hills. And if I'm doing 10 or 12K, it doesn't really matter. But if you've then got to run for another 80K or another 30K and you've got to run down Kadumba, that's when cramping happens, is because your quads or your adductors, often your adductors or your calves are tight and sore, and then they start cramping further on. So if you're doing the 50 or the 100, they're not or the miler, I would highly recommend trying to get in lots of stair training and practice hiking them. Most people are going to hike up almost all of the stairs in the UTA. So practice hiking up them, not necessarily running up them, so that you're less likely to get cramp on race day. What equipment / shoes do you recommend for, you're welcome, Mike, he sent me a love heart. What equipment, shoes do you recommend for the UTA 50? This is from Kate. I think people have actually done it in road shoes. In fact, I do have a patient who's got super wide feet. The only shoes he can fit are road shoes, and he's done the UTA 50 in a pair of road shoes and found it absolutely fine. But as a general rule of thumb, trail shoes have got a lot more grip. They're a bit more robust, the way the uppers are made, so that you can sort of change direction and not feel like you're sliding off the sole of the shoe. So I would highly recommend trail shoes. Poles, if you've practiced with them, most people get most of their benefit on the poles once they've reached the bottom of Kadumba. So climbing up the fire trail tends to be where most people use them. If you can get good at using them on the stairs, so some people will get benefit from using them on stairs. But you've got to practice that to get good at it. And then if you're one of the unlucky but quite numerous people who have sore knees going down Kadumba, they can also be very beneficial. Poles can be really beneficial for helping you get down Kadumba if your knees are sore or your ITBs are sore. And then obviously there's just all the mandatory gear that you have to take in the UTA 50, the jackets and the thermals and all that sort of stuff. Right, I'm just going to scroll down some more questions. Question from Sandy. Just run the Sydney Marathon. Well done, Sandy. I hope that went well, but never really done any trail. Is it reasonable to achieve the 50? If you're going to start soon, then yes, definitely achievable. But running on trails is very different than running on roads. For those of us that run on trails, I would argue that it's much more enjoyable, but it requires a lot more concentration, and that really gets to road runners for a start. They have to really focus on where you're putting your feet, and that actually drains your mental energy way more than you would expect. And the only way to get around that is just practice running on trails. And then obviously there's the vert. The Sydney Marathon is considered to be a hilly marathon, and that has got 350 meters, I think it was. So it's the hilliest of the majors. The UTA 50 has 2,400, so it's on magnitudes bigger. And again, because of the stairs and because of the massive long downhill, you just have to train specifically for it. So it's definitely achievable, Sandy. So I think you should sign up, but start your trail training soon. Lara, how can I train for downhills so that it protects my knee? As when I did the 50K this year, going down Kadumba gave me pain in my knees. Now that is actually, let's get onto this question now because it's going to come up a few times. That's one of the most common things that happens in the UTA is that people's knees are sore from 25 kilometers of running on stairs, and then they cannot cope with running down Kadumba because knees don't like running down hills at the best of times. And when your quads and legs are cooked, it can be a really unpleasant experience going down Kadumba. So the best thing to prevent that from happening is just appropriate training. So it's getting used to the stairs, it's getting used to climbing, but it's also getting used to downhill running. So downhill running puts the most stress on your knees, but it also ultimately, if you do it in microdoses, it is what creates the most strength so that your knees are more robust by the time the race comes around. If your knees are already sore, you obviously have to be careful with your downhill training so you can't do too much. That's where the strength and stability training comes in. Squats and lunges and things can help. Foam rolling your quads. A lot of people have, I reckon 90% of my physio patients own a foam roller, and of the 90% that own one, only 10% of them use it. The rest of them, they just sit there collecting dust. So foam rolling your quads, lots and lots of, like every day for 5 to 10 minutes can make a massive difference to your knees. And if your knees are happier when you start the UTA, they're more likely to be happy when you get to Kadumba. There's also taping techniques. You can tape your patella tendons. That can help quite a lot. And then, believe it or not, a strategy you hear all sorts of weird and wonderful things of people running down Kadumba, people zigzagging down the fire trail so that it's not as steep. People going down backwards, using their poles, obviously, but actually skipping. You know how kids skip, hop, hop, skip, skip, that skipping along the footpath. That skipping down Kadumba can actually be a way of protecting your knees because when you're hopping, it's the equivalent of a really, really short stride. So your foot's going to land underneath you. And so that, believe it or not, is a fairly effective way for lots of people. It's not going to work for everyone, but it's definitely worth trying. So if you're halfway down Kadumba and your knees are sore, start skipping. Right, Nick, I've signed up for my first 100. Well done, Nick. In March, the furthest I've run in the past is several marathons. How many 50 to 100K races would you recommend, or training runs, would you recommend between now and March? So March is, what have we got? September, October, November, December. So let's call it 6 months. Right, you probably should have signed up for 50, but anyway, you've signed up for 100. I would, actually, I've got an article about this. How long should your longest training run be? You could do one 50K event, and you could probably do 3 or 4 30K events because then you get to practice all that nutrition and stuff I've already talked about. I wouldn't do more than one 50K run because I think it takes too many cookies out of the jar. And given that you're new to this ultra distance, it's too risky in terms of causing yourself too many niggles so that you can't train consistently. Because back to word number one, consistency is the main thing. So yeah, I would do a couple of 30s and a 50, and then as potential events. And then your longest training runs, I always recommend people cap their training run at somewhere around 5 to 6 hours. So how far you get in 5 to 6 hours depends on how fast a runner you are, but also on the terrain that you're running on. So, if it's really hilly and rocky, then in 6 hours, you might get 30K. And so even though you've only done 30K and you're going to race 100, if you go beyond that 6 hours, you just start taking more, I just call them cookies out of the jar. You're draining more energy, causing more muscle damage, causing more fatigue. And then it's going to take, let's say you do a 9-hour run. I would argue that a 9-hour run, it's going to take a whole week to recover from. And so for the rest of that week, you probably shouldn't be doing much. Um, and so then it's compromising that consistency. Whereas if you capped it at 6 hours, is still a long run. But if you capped it at 6 hours, you might have a couple of days of recovery, and then you're back into your training again, so that you're more consistent, and overall you've done more miles. So that is what I would recommend for that. Brian, how does Carandra to Port Douglas 60 Ultra compare to the UTA 50? To be honest, Brian, I'm very sorry, but I haven't got a clue. I've just been up that way, but I don't know where that trail is. So I can't help you with that one, I'm sorry. Josh, I've run the UTA and finished 100 4 times. At what point, do you make the jump from 100K to 100 miles? Took me about 40 years. When you feel like you're ready. It's a pretty vague answer. I have had patients that, believe it or not, their first trail run has been 100 miles. I wouldn't recommend it. I think if you've done 400s and you've survived them, and the fact that you're even asking the questions, to be honest, means you probably should do it. Because I think if you knew you shouldn't do it, you'd know you shouldn't do it. So, Josh, I think you should sign up for the miler. Shane O'Neill will attest that it's a lovely course because he just said earlier that I was giving it a hard time. Right, that is the end of the message questions, but then I've got some ones that emailed through to me, so I'm just going to go through them. So this is from Beck. I'm doing the COSI 30, so I'm going to miss the first 4 weeks of the UTA base training, but planning on signing up for the UTA 22. What would your recommendation be for when to start the base training? Should we take a recovery week or a few days after completing COSI and then simply slot back into the relevant week of the UTA? That depends on the individual, but if you race the 32 COSI, it's probably going to partly depend on how you pull up in terms of like injuries and niggles. But if you race it, then I would have a very easy, at least 2 weeks or 3 weeks afterwards. And then because you've already got that high level of fitness because you've just been training for COSI, you will be able to safely jump straight back into the base training plan. If you go easy in COSI, you probably only need 1 week and then you could get back into the base training plan. I think something to mention here, as much as I love everybody following training plans and being on training plans, I think there's also a major mental benefit in not being on a plan for short periods of time. So if you've done an A race, then having a couple of weeks where you just chill out and you wake up when you want to wake up. And if you wake up and think, I can only be bothered running 5K, or I can't be bothered running at all, I think that's actually really good. I think that mental refresh of just having some time off, actually ticking boxes and following a plan. Runners love ticking boxes. Most of us have some sort of OCD type of personality where ticking boxes and achieving goals is what we like to do. I'm certainly extremely guilty of that myself. But I think just every now and then having a short period where you're not on a plan. Christmas is a good time to do it as an example. Just have a couple of weeks of chilling out, just so that you feel mentally refreshed when you get back on the plan. And then Beck has also asked, would you recommend COSI or UTA as a first 50K race? Having just said how hard the COSI 100 is, the COSI 50 is a bit different because it starts high, but you drop down to 1100 meters pretty quickly. So I would say that the COSI 50 is probably an easier 50 than the UTA, but the last 13K of COSI is really hard. You get to the village at Threadbow and you have to climb up to Eagle's Nest and go back down again. And the descent from Eagle's Nest, you get to 4K to go. This is the same for the miler and the 100. You get to 4K to go, and it's the most brutal downstairs I think I've ever done. I'd broken a pole by then and was using one pole and having to jump with 2 feet down some of the stairs because they were sort of waist height. So don't take the COSI 50 lightly, but I think overall it's probably slightly easier than the UTA 50. Right, question from Julie. I've run the 100K 6 times, the 50K 3 times, and the 11K once. Jeepers, that is awesome. Haven't missed a year since I started. Love the vibe. I've gotten slower as I've got older. My fear now is falling over. I'm a female runner, 54, menopausal, and I've fallen, catching my foot on a rock or root a few times in training, badly hurting myself. Regaining confidence is my question. Have you got any tips or hints on regaining or building confidence? Good question, Julie. Sorry to hear about the injuries, and well done on so many UTA finishes. That really is awesome. So in terms of tripping over and rebuilding confidence, I jotted down a few notes. So one thing I think can actually help a lot is thinner shoes. So the more padding you've got in your shoes, the less you can feel the ground and the more your foot wobbles around on the shoe because the shoe can squish. The firmer or the lower you are to the ground and the firmer the sole, there's a bit less comfort because the soles of your feet might end up getting a bit sore, but you'll probably feel a lot more stable. So thinner shoes are one option, and I'm not talking Beth, don't go and get some Vibram 5 fingers. There's a whole range of stack heights you can get in shoes now, but maybe some thinner ones. Single leg stability exercises, it's all the stuff in the workouts on our training plan, single leg deadlifts, single leg squats, passing the kettlebell around your body, anything where you improve your balance on one foot is going to help your balance. Running form drills, so do some butt kicks so that you get used to picking your feet up off the ground, because often what causes people to trip is they become very shuffly, especially as you get tired, and you kick your toes into things because there's a lot of obstacles on trails. And so kicking your toes into things is usually what makes you stumble. Squats and lunges just create that strength in your quads and your glutes and your hips. So lots of squats and lunges will help. Even if you stumble, it will help you to prevent a fall because your muscles will hopefully be stronger to keep you upright. Push-ups, believe it or not, because if you do fall, having strength in your arms and hands to catch yourself when you fall might save you from hitting your teeth and hitting your face, and those sorts of things. So we've got upper body exercises in the Streek workouts. So do the upper body exercises. Lots of runners hate doing upper body and probably try and avoid it. don't avoid it. They also help a lot with your poles. So if you do push-ups, you'll be better at using your poles. And then it's just the obvious one, practice training on terrain that is as similar as possible to what you're going to expect on race day. So if you enter a technical race, train on technical terrain. And the risk goes up because you're on that terrain more often, but you have to get used to it to get good at it. I hope that answers your question, Julie. Henry, when running down sets of stairs, particularly uneven stairs like on the UTA course, is it better to maintain a higher cadence and hit every step or maintain pace and skip steps? Definitely every step. So if you jump down 2 steps at a time, you're effectively hitting the ground harder and using your quads as a shock absorber a lot more, which puts more stress on your knee and a lot more stress on your quads. And so if you start cramping later in the race, whether it's your quads or your knees get sore or your adductors start cramping, that's usually because you've overworked your quads on downhills. So definitely take every step. Try and keep the steps really short. Another example of that is some bush stairs are quite wide. And so sometimes you can actually get both feet on a step before going down to the next one. So you should also do that. So if they're wide steps, rather than bounding down them still one at a time, but you should probably put both feet on each step. So it's almost like you're going down half at a time, if that makes sense. So yeah, always err on the side of short steps and taking lots of steps as opposed to taking big ones. Same for downhills. When you're running down a hill, down Kadumba, take really short steps. Angela, regarding the UTA miler, actually, I think I covered this in that first bit, especially if they change the start time and runners are out there for 2 nights with more night running than daylight in total. Actually, sorry, this is a different question. So if that's the circumstance, should you stick to only a normal couple of night runs in training, or should you incorporate more night runs and hikes so that you get used to training during the night and training when you're tired? And then this is from Angela. She's also said that she thinks that training through the night will interrupt her sleep and affect her recovery. So I agree entirely. I think you definitely have to get good and comfortable with running at nighttime, but that could be from, if it's winter, it could be 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Or even 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. and then you're not really compromising any sleep. You have to know how well your torch works. You have to know how long your battery is going to last. And you've got to be comfortable on the type of terrain you're likely to encounter in the dark. So don't shy away from night training. But I think I'm changing my mind more and more on the positives versus the negatives of doing a whole night of training. So like finishing work on a Friday and starting a training run at 9 p.m. and finishing at 4 in the morning, there's benefits in it because you're training when you're tired and you're getting used to running through the night. But I actually now think that negatives probably outweigh the positives because you're just compromising so much recovery time. It's going to take you 2 or 3 days to regain or make up for the sleep that you've lost. Your diet's probably been a little bit different during that period because you've thrown everything out because you've been up during the night and eating gels during the night. So yeah, I would probably do lots of night training for the miler, but try and stick within windows where it doesn't compromise your recovery too much. A good example, I used to do this on a fairly regular basis. Get up at 3:30 in the morning. So I might be having 5 or 6 hours sleep. So I'm not missing a whole night, but I get up at 3 hours or at 3:30, and then I might have 4 hours of running in the dark then. So that's a great time to practice your night running without too much of a cap or an effect on your sleep. Blair, last year in the 100, my quads blew up and cramped from halfway, which made the Kadumba downhill very slow. I think this was due to the downhill braking in the mud from Duncan's and also foggy knob. So I would agree. I think it's the downhill braking, like I was just describing with jumping downstairs, that causes your quads to start cramping and blowing up and causing sore knees. And so it's that same stuff I talked about, doing lots of lunges and squats, and you can do those runs that are linked in the training plan, which have the squats and lunges built into them. Training on the right terrain. And then actually, let's just cover the downhill running. The most benefit, what happens is when you run down a hill, is you're damaging your quad muscles quite a lot. So you're causing little micro tears. Those tears, when you finish your run and you eat good food and you sleep, those tears repair And when they repair, your quad muscles get stronger. And so that strength lasts only about 6 weeks. So the most important time for some downhill training, and this we've got this in the training plans, is actually that last 6 weeks. So if you go out and smash your quads 4 months before the UTA, it's not going to help your UTA, not in the way that you want it to. So in the training plan, some of our long runs have a downhill focus where I say you're more focusing on the downhill part and going down going down the hills hard, and even if you're walking back up them, and they tend to be 6 weeks out and 4 weeks out. So hopefully that answers that question. And then quad strength, single leg squats, normal squats, some goblet squats with heavier weights, and just lots of vert and training is the best thing that you can do to help reduce knee pain and your quads blowing up. Question from Sam, and then there's been quite a few more just come through on the meeting things, and then we're probably going to have to wind things up reasonably soon because we're nearly an hour in. Here's a question from Sam. I'm training for the UTA, the 100K at UTA, and have done other 100K events previously. From what I've heard, how the elevation changes will be one of the biggest differences between this and something like Buffalo Stampede, which I think has overall similar elevation, with lots of stairs and steep sections rather than inclines. Is that correct? So I've done loads of mountain biking down near Buffalo, but not, I've run up Mystic and a few other places. I think the biggest difference is probably the stairs, and I think where people get into most trouble with cramping and sore knees is because of the stairs. I would say that the inclines on the UTA are less steep than most of the ones you'll find at Buffalo Stampede. So even though Kadumba seems steep, it's about 12%, whereas I think a lot of the climbs down at Buffalo are steeper than that. So I think focusing, if you possibly can, more on stairs is probably going to prepare your legs for what they would miss if you're only training on that Buffalo type of terrain. Excuse me. I hope that answers that question. Sam also asked if he's heard there's lots of pinch points where runners, especially towards the back of the field, have to stop and wait. Welcome, Sam. Just give me a thumbs up. I covered that in the first bit. I'm pretty hopeful and confident that putting in the terrace ladders and shifting a couple of things around and widening the start window is hopefully going to fix all of those problems. There was a huge amount of feedback from runners after this year saying that they'd actually be reluctant to do the UTA 100 if it was going to cause the same traffic jams, because it's pretty frustrating standing there for 2 hours and not moving. So I think it's great that Ironman have listened to those requests and done exactly what I think pretty much everything they can do to split the field up. Tim just has sent a message saying he spent 2 hours on Duncan's Pass. That's so frustrating because it means you're going to finish 2 hours later, so you lose 2 hours of sleep. But also for the people that are near the cutoffs, it just creates that much more stress because you're that much closer to the cutoff time. So yeah, hats off to the UTA for fixing it. Let's hope they dial the miler start time back a little bit. Right, I'm going to jump back into a couple more questions. I answered Josh's. Logan has said, do I still taper training the same way, so 3 weeks before 100K, if my training hasn't been as good as I hoped? Yes, you do. Because those last 3 weeks, if you do a really long run, so my runs 3 weeks out are usually about 3 hours up to 4, and 2 weeks out would be absolute maximum of 3 hours. I often try and cap them at 2. Doing more than that just creates more fatigue. You'll carry the fatigue into race day, and then your race will actually be harder and probably slower. So even if you're undercooked, you're better off being undercooked and fresh than trying to play catch up in the last 3 weeks. So yeah, tapering is vital, Logan. So yeah, I would highly recommend the taper. Sharon has left, but said thank you. Thanks, Sharon. Melissa wants me to repeat my response about missing a week of training due to being sick. And she thinks we won't hear it on the recording because of that background noise. So I'll repeat that. So, um, if you get sick in let's just say it's in one of the big weeks of training, and you can't train for, we'll call it week 9, and then week 10 you have to ease back in because you've been sick, so you're trying to be sensible. Week 11, whether you jump straight back into week 11 or whether you repeat week 9 or even have another easy week, depends on how sick you've been. So if you've still got flu symptoms, then you still shouldn't be running much at all, if at all. But if you feel like you've recovered from the flu, then then whether or not you jump straight back in depends on your history of running and all your injuries and niggles in the lead up as well. So if you've been running ultras for years, you know your body pretty well. Week 11 is going to be 70K. You're pretty comfortable with 70K, then you can jump into it. But if this is your first time doing an ultra and these are the biggest weeks you've ever done, then you need to be more conservative. So if you've done week 9 and then had to not finish week 9, you've done a really easy week 10, I would probably repeat week 9 again. And then you have to sort of just try and find the happy medium for the next week. And then it would be a recovery week in the training plan anyway. So it's a bit of a vague answer, but it depends so much on circumstances from person to person. It depends on your current niggles and injuries, your history of running, how strong you are, how well your immune system's coping with everything. So yeah, it's a tricky question to answer. It's one of those things where you just have to judge on a sort of person by person basis when I'm coaching people one to one. Or our Facebook group is a great forum to jump in and ask those questions. I try and answer the questions as much as I can, but nowadays, because there's 2,500 of us and lots of people have been not following these plans for a long time, the answers from most of our members are awesome. So most of these questions have been asked or been experienced by other people. And so there's really good answers within that Facebook group. Right, I think we better call it quits because it is 8:30. Apologize for perhaps the quality of the audio a couple of times. I haven't done a webinar for quite a while. And if there's enough demand, then I guess we could do another one. And I don't know, perhaps even make it just question and answers because that seems to be probably where most people are getting most of their benefit. So thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to turn this into a video and save it on Streek so you can just open it. And then we've got a PDF which has got all the guidelines of what the events are like, the changes that UTA have made, and how much training you should be capable of doing before you start one of our training plans. So hopefully that'll be useful as well. And then, like I said, any questions, stick them in the Facebook group. And please join our Streek Strava Club. I'm way better on Strava than I am on any other form of social media. So the Strava group has kicked off to a good start. And people are posting pictures of their training runs and asking questions and stuff. So please use the Strava group. And I hope everyone got something out of it. Thanks for coming along.